Headliner Nation, what is going on? Welcome back to the Fantasy Headliners. Kyle here to walk you through some of our Week 2 waiver wire targets. Now, Week 1 of the NFL season was absolutely crazy. We've got some really big injuries that could end up reshaping some fantasy football rosters. We had a lot of studs do absolutely nothing, and we have owners that are, for the lack of the better word, panicking right now. Don't panic. Stay with us. Calm down. Breathe for a second. We're going to get you through all this. We're going to go through several options today at the wide receiver, running back, tight end position. I've got some streamers that you could potentially be taking a look at defensive special team and quarterback, and we might have some players to talk about that. Should or shouldn't they be dropped off of your roster? But for right now, let's go ahead and dive into it. We're going to start at the running back position, and the number one guy to talk about at the running back position might be Jamal Williams. I mean, this is a game in which my Detroit Lions was at the game on Sunday. Great game. Detroit, listen, I know kind of their offseason mantra was grit. They showed it. I mean, they could have given up against a good Philadelphia team, but they didn't. They battled back, and they almost came close to pulling that one out. Great game by Philadelphia. But this was very interesting that Jamal Williams got 13 touches in a game that they trailed quite a bit. And he had 2 touchdowns. He got the goal line work, short yardage situations are one thing that Detroit absolutely showed us in Week 1. They are going to establish the run, and Swift and Williams are going to be the guys to do it. Washington last week to Jacksonville, allowing just under 6 yards per carry. I am looking to grab Jamal Williams, especially if I own DeAndre Swift, because if anything happens to Swift, Jamal Williams is going to see a ton of work. But even if you don't own Swift, he might be a guy that we could take a look at as a flex option. And oh, by the way, real quick, shout out to Jake for helping me with all the notes. I was in Detroit and on the road until late last night, so I didn't have time to sit down and go through all of the notes. I did a few things, did some research, listened to some stuff on the way home on the drive. But listen, big kudos to Jake for helping me out so we could get this video out first thing this morning. Rex Burkhead, do we need to take him more serious in Houston? Now, we don't want to say we told you so, but we did tell you that Dameon Pierce week 1 may not be the logical play. And Dameon Pierce, it wasn't great. He outtouched Pierce 19-12. He was second on the team with 8 targets. And week 2, I don't really expect to be easy going. So I'm not telling you to run out and grab Rex Burkhead. He has some PPR potential. He's not going to be a starter right away, but it looks like he is going to hamper Dameon Pierce, and that is really unfortunate. That was a tough matchup last week, though. We'll see what happens moving forward. We're not off the bandwagon on Dameon Pierce. Not at all. Just keep an eye on this situation, knowing that Burkhead got so many more touches than Pierce did. Tyler Algier. I feel like there's a really good nickname there that we're going to find this season. Damian Williams was injured in week 1 with the ribs. Okay, a little bit of a rib injury for him. Now, Cordero Patterson ended up leading the backfield. Again, made sense. Was very good last week. But keep an eye on the situation. I don't know if they're going to want to keep giving him 25 touches out of the backfield weekly. So expect Algier to be a much bigger contributor coming up here in the next week or so, especially going up against a team like the Rams. Going to be a little bit tougher, but we do know that sometimes you just got to run the ball at the Rams to kind of get them off balance. So we'll see what happens this coming week. Jaylen Warren for Pittsburgh, potentially stepping in for the injured Najee Harris. Haven't really heard back on his foot yet, but I know talking with Dr. Ethan and seeing that Najee Harris was already hampered in the preseason and in training camp with a foot injury, this doesn't bode well for him. He could be missing some time here, and Jaylen Warren will likely be the guy to kind of step in. It was very interesting that they used Chase Claypool in the Deebo Samuel role. Keep an eye on that. Jeff Wilson Jr., Elijah Mitchell injured his knee in a very sloppy rain game, which is unfortunate. No word yet on what that is. So again, we're keeping an eye on that. But Jeff Wilson will likely end up stepping in. Now, he didn't do anything to really kind of like blow up after Mitchell went down. Trey Lance is going to get a lot. We're going to see Deebo continue to get some in that role. TD Price could end up being activated as well. Wilson likely getting the first crack at the job, so keep an eye on him. Kenyon Drake from Baltimore, he led the backfield in week 12, and I kind of talked about it last week where I wouldn't be surprised if Mike Davis led that backfield in week 1, and then Drake slowly started to take away from him because Drake was the better running back. It didn't even take that week. Drake is already taking away. Is Dobbins going to miss more time? It definitely feels like they're going to err on the side of caution with J.K. Dobbins for some time now. So if you are a Dobbins owner, Kenyon Drake is the guy that I'm taking a shot at this week. Let's flip the script. Let's go to the wide receiver position. Several options over there. Devin Duvernay is a great one to talk about because I brought him up last week. And I always love bringing up someone on the waiver wire video, telling you to keep an eye on him because he could be an ad coming up soon. And then the dude goes out there and has a great game. Devin Duvernay, only 4 catches, 54 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Now, I told everybody last week that he could end up filling that Marquise Brown big play role, that Rashad Bateman wasn't the same wide receiver that Marquise Brown was. And I think that's a good thing. I'm not knocking Bateman for that. I think that's a good thing for Bateman. But Devin Duvernay could be that field stretcher, the guy to kind of help bring the top off the defense at times. 4 catches, 54 yards, 2 touchdowns. Miami just allowed 213 yards to wide receivers last week. We're keeping an eye on Duvernay. DJ Chark been bringing him up for quite a while, was second on the team last week in targets with 8. The touchdown upside is there. Washington just allowed 275 yards to wide receivers in week 1. DJ Chark is absolutely a guy that we have talked about for a while, being a deep sleeper on this Lions team that, again, even though they lost last week, showed some battle. Jared Goff made some mistakes, but end up being better at times. Hopefully he can get DJ Chark the ball, because if he does, he could be a guy that absolutely has touchdown upside every single week. Isaiah McKenzie will still be on here, and you could supplement Jamison Crowder here if you wanted to, because these guys are really going to kind of go back and forth in the slot. Now, I think Isaiah McKenzie is going to end up seeing more targets out of the slot than Jamison Crowder. But it could switch quickly, and we could go Jamison Crowder instead. So Isaiah McKenzie, we're going to leave him on here. Tennessee struggled, in the short passing game this past week. They saw them bring kind of Saquon Barkley out into that short fieldage area. Isaiah McKenzie would likely dominate some of those targets. We could see Dawson Knox get a little bit better of an opportunity coming up this week. But Isaiah McKenzie is another guy to continue to take a look at for Buffalo if we're having wide receiver issues and we need to add somebody. Jahan Dotson from Washington. We talked this guy up in the preseason. We love his big playability. We love what he could do in Washington. We weren't 100% sold that Carson Wentz was the huge issue in Indianapolis. We think he still has enough to have fantasy viable wide receivers. He's not a great quarterback by any means, but he does enough to help us out as fantasy owners. So 5 targets last week and 3 receptions, but 2 of those were highlight reel type touchdowns. I mean, the guy looked fantastic, big playmaker. Wentz is trying to push the ball down the field. He's trying to stretch it. He's not being scared, which is great for Wentz. He needs to be like that. And Detroit just gave up some huge numbers to A.J. Brown. Now, A.J. Brown is a lot different, and I will say, as somebody who sat right there and watched the game play out, A.J. Brown just bullied. Yeah, I mean, he just bullied the cornerbacks for Detroit. And I mentioned that in all my wide receiver videos last week, that they didn't have the size to keep up with A.J. Brown. So I expected A.J. Brown to have a big week 1. It's a little bit different with Tyler McLaurin or Jahan Dotson this week. Detroit is probably going to have a little bit of I don't want to say an easier time, but they're not going to be as knocked around as, say, A.J. Brown did do to them. But keep an eye on all of this. Jahan Dotson could end up having another really, really good week. Now, my Fantrax find of the week brought to you by our friends over at Fantrax. Make sure, again, if you're doing any type of fantasy leagues, that you're taking a look at the Fantrax website to run those leagues for you, and use code word headliners if you do sign up or move a league over there. But Jarvis Landry, I mean, his ownership percentage is kind of all over the place. In certain areas, I see it as low as 30. In other areas, I see it as high as 60. He may already be owned in your league, but he's my Fantrax find of the week because of what I said about him last week, that I really, really thought that he could be the leading wide receiver for New Orleans. Michael Thomas had 2 touchdowns this past week, but that was really it. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to watch the film of Michael Thomas, but other than those 2 touchdown catches, one of which I believe a safety or a cornerback just kind of got turned around on, he really didn't do a whole lot. In fact, going into the fourth quarter, the guy had 1 fantasy point. If it weren't for those touchdowns, he would have had an abysmal day. Now, was he on a snap count? No, he was not. But I need to see if the routes that he was running, if he was 100% healthy, because Jarvis Landry is, and he led the team with 9 targets, had 7 catches, 114 yards, averaged 16.3 yards per reception. Jameis, moving the ball along, feeling good. He looked a lot better this week. Very tough matchup coming up against Tampa Bay here this coming week. But still, for me, Jarvis Landry is a guy, half PPR and PPR leagues, that you absolutely have to own. Even if you don't use him this week, you still need to have him for the rest of the season. This is going to be a guy that will likely see 100+ targets again this year. Could end up eclipsing close to 1,000 or 100, or I was going to say 1,000 receptions. 100 receptions, potentially around 1,000 receiving yards. These are all things that we need to have on our team. So grab Jarvis Landry if he is still out there. Zay Jones from Jacksonville, second on the team with targets and 9. He did catch 6 of those for 65 yards. Jacksonville, they're going to have to throw it a lot weekly, right? The defense isn't quite where it needs to be yet. Lawrence did throw the ball 40+ times this week, and Indianapolis allowed 240 yards to Houston wide receivers, which was crazy considering how good their defense could end up being this season. So I don't know if it was an off week for Indianapolis or Houston was just a lot better this week, or if we're going to have to worry about that on a weekly basis. Keep an eye on Zay Jones. Josh Palmer, Keenan Allen dealing with a hamstring injury. Josh Palmer is going to end up being the first guy up in that Keenan Allen role. I know the Chargers numbers were not great week 1, but Josh Palmer is, if I had to do a Fantrax Find of the Week part 2, he would probably be it. And if Jarvis Landry is already owned in your league, Josh Palmer is the guy. I would grab him right now, especially not knowing how long Keenan Allen could end up being out for. And then Robbie Anderson really led the team with 8 targets last week. All right, caught 5 of those for 102 yards and a touchdown. Him and Baker Mayfield, apparently they're on the same page. Anderson didn't want to play with Baker Mayfield a couple of weeks ago, and now he's looking like a fantasy viable option. He's the deep threat on an offense that really is going to have some guys underneath that need that big playability down the field to open things up for them. So Robbie Anderson, him having such a good performance is actually great for him and for the guys around him. So yes, give me some potential Robbie Anderson moving forward. To the tight end position, OJ Howard, the dude showed up just out of nowhere. He's released by Buffalo, shows up to Houston, and he scores a couple of touchdowns. OJ Howard is a great receiving weapon. But who knew it would be Davis Mills that could unlock him, right? Well, for me, OJ Howard, definitely love him at the tight end position. He might not, he only saw 2 targets. Both of those ended up being caught for touchdowns. But, that just allows you to get worked into the offense a little bit more. And as a tight end, if you score a touchdown on a weekly basis, you're going to be a tight end 1 almost locked in stone every single week. So OJ Howard, absolutely. If you're dealing with issues at the tight end position, OJ Howard is the guy that I am looking towards this week. Do it. Keep an eye on OJ Howard. Go grab him. And then Gerald Everett, again, kind of the same thing that we talked about with Josh Palmer. Keenan Allen is going to be injured. Some big play potential for Gerald Everett. He averaged 18 yards per reception, scored a touchdown, 54 yards in week 1. Some of that coming from that Keenan Allen injury being hampered a little bit. And KC just gave up a touchdown to Zach Ertz this past week. So Gerald Everett could be in line for another one coming up here. Hayden Hurst, Higgins is in the concussion protocol. All right. So that really is what is going to allow Hayden Hurst to unlock his potential. 5 catches for 46 yards. He ended up having more targets than Tyler Boyd. I think part of that was Joe Burrow trying to take a step back there for a couple of minutes because it was clear that he was trying way too hard. He was trying, to push the ball into certain situations that he shouldn't have. And because of that, it led to just, unfortunately, not a great week for Joey Burrow. And then for Robert Tonyan, he looks pretty healthy. Definitely saw some frustrations from Aaron Rodgers this past week. He did have 5 targets, but Aaron Rodgers being frustrated with the weapons around him means that there's just a bigger opportunity for Big Bobby Tonyan right now. All right. onto the streaming options now. What are some guys that we could potentially stream if we need to? Got two at the quarterback position, especially if you have Dak Prescott, sounding like he's going to be missing quite a few weeks here to begin the season. Matt Ryan going up against Jacksonville this week. Completed 32 of 50 passes for 352 yards last week. Carson Wentz just lit up the Jacksonville defense as well, throwing for 313 yards and 4 touchdowns. Expect Matt Ryan to kind of jump back this week and feel a little bit better and more comfortable. Carson Wentz going up against Detroit. I mean, he's coming off a huge week 1. Yeah, Jalen Hurts had a good week last week, but really, again, it had a lot to do, and I don't want to be a Jalen Hurts. I don't want to hate on him too much, okay? Because he had a good week, but it was his running upside. Because if you go back and you watch the actual game film from Detroit, outside of maybe 5-6 passes that he threw, almost all of his passes were not on target. It was an exceptional job by A.J. Brown bullying the cornerbacks and putting himself in a position to win. That Jalen Hurts actually, a lot of passes were off target, either behind or too high or too low. He was not threading the needle last week very well. He had some very good passes, but a majority of his passes were not very good. That was part of the issue. So if you're looking to stream Carson Wentz, I do believe that you're not going to see the same type of thing. Also, Detroit did a decent job of getting to Jalen Hurts, but he extended the play with his legs. Carson Wentz isn't going to be able to do that nearly as much. So keep an eye on this one. I like the potential for him, but I would definitely go Matt Ryan instead. Now the defensive special teams that we should be taking a look at potentially using this week to stream if you need to. Carolina and Cleveland are the two that stand out to me going up against the New York teams. Now, the New York Giants, they did a pretty decent job last week, but I still think that passing game is going to be very inconsistent at times. And if Carolina can step up and say, hey, we're going to try to take away Barkley as much as possible and make this a one-dimensional game, is Daniel Jones going to be able to win through the air enough to be able to beat them? So for Carolina, for me, going to be a little bit tough on the outside in terms of coverage. We'll see what ends up happening with that, but I think that could be a good streaming option this week because I think they could get to the Giants a little bit. And then for the Cleveland Browns, the New York Jets, they just didn't look real in sync last week. Obviously not having Zach Wilson, Joe Flacco being the guy. Nobody looked that great. Corey Davis ended up having a decent week. Elijah Moore, Garrett Wilson, nobody had like a great standout week for the Jets. So Cleveland Browns, they end up denying Baker Mayfield his revenge tour this past week. Can they kind of take a step forward again, get to the New York Jets, and be a good streaming option for you in terms of, getting some sacks, maybe getting a turnover or 2. And then in terms of dropping players, I'm not going to list anybody to drop in this video because I don't want anybody overreacting to week 1, and I'm not going to overreact to it either. So in the comments down below, if you've got a player that you're thinking about dropping, let me know, and I will respond and let you know whether or not I believe you should anticipate dropping him, okay? And let me know, hey, I'm thinking about dropping so-and-so for maybe one of the guys on this list. I'll also kind of help you out with that too. Because again, I don't want us to overreact. But depending on what your roster looks like, I don't want to just blindly say, hey, we're done with this guy after 1 week. Depending upon what your roster looks like, then we will take a look at some other guys that we, maybe be able to switch in and out. But ladies and gentlemen, there is your waiver wire video for week 2 of the NFL season. Time to start getting ourselves prepared against some injuries, ineffective play, things like that we might need to make some adjustments on our roster for. Hit the like button for me. Subscribe to the channel if you are new here because you're not going to want to miss out on any of the content that we got for you. And then again, leave me a comment down below if you've got questions about players you may or may not want to drop. Ladies and gentlemen, appreciate you all tuning in to this episode of the Fantasy Headliners. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I will catch y'all in the next one.